There is a kind of silence that doesn't simply come from the absence of sound. It's the silence that follows the storm of connection, the silence that lives in the space once filled by laughter, touch, conversation, by someone's presence. Healing, in many ways, begins here, not in the return of noise, but in the quiet that demands to be felt. You see, absence is not nothingness. Absence is a presence of its own. It has texture, weight, taste. It is the echo of what was once vibrant. The way an empty chair holds the shape of the person who used to sit there. The way a pillow still carries the warmth of a body that is gone. We try so hard to escape it. We fill the silence with distractions, messages, work, noise, people. We scroll endlessly, hoping the hum of stimulation will drown out the ache of what we miss. But healing is not found in the filling. It's found in the sitting, in staying, in learning to breathe in that quiet space without reaching for what used to be. When someone leaves, through distance, breakup, death, or disconnection, what remains is not only the void of their presence, but also the reverberation of their impact. Absence becomes the teacher. It invites us to ask, who am I when the mirror of the other is no longer there? We are creatures of attachment. From the moment we are born, we reach for connection, a mother's voice, a friend's hand, a lover's gaze. Connection gives us meaning. It anchors us. But when that connection breaks, we lose not only the other, but also parts of ourselves that existed only in relation to them. That is the silent devastation of absence. It unmasks the places within us that were built in dialogue. And yet, in this very space of loss, something begins to stir. Not immediately. At first, the silence feels unbearable. It's like walking into a room where the air has gone stale. The walls seem to whisper memories you didn't ask to hear. The bed becomes too large, the evenings too long, the future uncertain. But if you stay, if you sit long enough with that silence, you start to hear other sounds, the small breath of your own existence, the gentle pulse of your being, the faint, steady rhythm of a self that is learning to live again. Healing is not about erasing absence. It is about befriending it. I often think of absence as a landscape we are invited to walk through. At first, it's barren, just fields of emptiness, cold wind, nothing to hold on to. But the longer you walk, the more your eyes adjust. You begin to see the subtle hues, the quiet beauty of a gray morning, the grace of stillness, the soft light that appears when the noise fades. This is where resilience lives, not in avoidance, but in the capacity to inhabit what is difficult. Sometimes when we are grieving, people tell us to move on. But healing is not about moving on. It's about moving with. The absence doesn't leave you. You simply learn to carry it differently. It becomes woven into the fabric of your story, a thread of tenderness that shapes how you love, how you listen, how you understand the fragility of human connection. In every silence, there is memory. And in every memory, there is a lesson, not about loss, but about life. Let me tell you a story. A woman once told me that after her husband died, she would set 2 cups of coffee on the table every morning. One for her, one for him. For months, she did this ritual. At first, it was unbearable. The empty cup mocked her. It was the cruel reminder of what was no longer there. But, over time, she began to see that cup differently. It became her conversation with absence. A way to say, I still see you. I still remember. That ritual didn't bring him back, but it allowed her to remain in dialogue with what was lost, not to keep it alive, but to integrate it. Healing doesn't erase the past. It transforms the way we hold it. There's a saying, I love. Grief is love that has nowhere to go. But I think healing is the process of finding where that love can live now, perhaps in art, in kindness, in how we hold others, or simply in how we breathe through the silence. Because silence, when we stop fearing it, can become sacred. It can be the space where we listen, not to the noise of longing, but to the whisper of growth. Maybe that's why so many spiritual traditions begin in stillness. Because silence is not emptiness. It's the space where truth begins to speak. But for many of us, sitting in that silence feels unbearable. We live in a world that rewards movement, productivity, noise. To be still is almost an act of rebellion. And yet, to heal, we must rebel. We must dare to be with ourselves when there's nothing left to distract us. We must allow the ache to exist without rushing to mend it. This is the paradox of healing, that transformation happens not through doing, but through allowing. When you stop running from absence, you start to see that it's not your enemy. It's your mirror. It shows you the contours of your attachment, the depth of your love, the strength of your longing. And it invites you to meet yourself anew, not as half of a whole, but as a being who can hold both connection and solitude with grace. Healing is not about replacing what was lost. It's about remembering that you are still whole, even in the presence of absence. Because the silence that once felt empty begins, over time, to hum with something else. Presence. Your presence. There is a quiet art to sitting with absence. It is not something you master. It is something you surrender to. To sit with absence is to resist the instinct to fix what cannot be fixed. It is to stop searching for closure in places that were never meant to close. We are so conditioned to look for resolution, a neat ending, a clean goodbye, a moment when the pain subsides and the lesson feels clear. But life, in its truth, is rarely that tidy. Some doors remain half open. Some words remain unsaid. Some stories end mid-sentence. And the silence that follows becomes part of who we are. Sitting with absence means making peace with incompleteness. We often believe healing will arrive with understanding, that once we make sense of what happened, we will finally be free. But there is a deeper kind of healing that comes not from understanding, but from acceptance. From realizing that some things will never make sense, and that's okay. The mind craves answers, but the heart needs space. Think of silence as that space, a vast room where the echoes of the past can settle without judgment. You enter, you sit, you breathe. You allow what arises to come and go, the grief, the tenderness, the longing, the fragments of memory that visit uninvited. This is not passivity. This is participation in the most profound sense, an act of intimate presence with what is real. When I speak about silence, I do not mean absence of life. I mean the fullness that emerges when we stop fighting what is. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of disconnection. Solitude is the peace of connection, with oneself, with the world, with something larger than understanding. But to reach solitude, we must pass through the corridor of loneliness. And that corridor can feel endless. It is there that absence speaks loudest. It whispers memories like ghosts, sometimes tender, sometimes cruel. It makes us question our worth, our identity, our place in the world. It can make even the simplest act, making breakfast, turning off the light, walking down the street, feel like moving through molasses. And yet, it is in these ordinary moments that healing often begins. Because healing rarely announces itself with grand gestures. It arrives quietly, the morning you realize the tears didn't come. The night you find yourself laughing without guilt. The moment you reach for your phone to share something, and instead, you smile, softly, to yourself. Something inside you is shifting. Slowly, silently. Healing happens in the subtle rewiring of being, when we begin to relate to the silence not as punishment, but as a companion. It reminds me of how a wound closes. The skin doesn't rush. It doesn't force itself to heal. It simply knows. The cells gather, the edges meet, the tissue reforms. Nature teaches us that healing is not a linear event, but a patient conversation between what was torn and what longs to be whole again. So too with the heart. When we sit with absence, we allow the heart to have its own pace, its own rhythm of repair. But to do this, we must cultivate a relationship with silence that is not fearful, but curious. Ask yourself, what lives in my silence? What stories, what truths, what forgotten desires rise when I stop speaking, stop seeking, stop escaping? Sometimes absence reveals not only what was lost, but what was never fully lived. Because absence doesn't just point backward, it points inward. It shows us where we have been giving ourselves away, where we have been defining our worth through the reflection of others. It calls us back to the center, to the home within ourselves that no one can take away. I remember once speaking to a man who said, "When she left, I didn't know who I was anymore." I asked him, "Who were you when you were with her?" He paused. "Someone alive." And there it was, the essence of what absence teaches us. We often think we miss the person, but what we truly miss is the version of ourselves that came alive in their presence. The way we laughed, the way we touched, the way we loved. So when they're gone, we grieve not only them, but that aliveness, that spark. Healing, then, is about reclaiming that aliveness as your own. To realize that the version of you that once bloomed in the presence of another is not lost, it is within you, waiting for your own embrace. Silence becomes the soil in which this reclamation grows. It is in the quiet moments, the walks alone, the evenings without plans, the mornings without a text, that we begin to plant seeds of new identity. Seeds that say, "I am still here. I am still capable of love. I am still becoming." And maybe that's the secret. Healing is not about returning to who you were before the loss. It's about becoming who you are because of it. There is a subtle dignity in those who have known absence and learned to sit with it. You can see it in their eyes, a kind of soft knowing, a quiet strength. They no longer demand certainty from life. They have learned to dance with mystery. They understand that silence is not a void to be feared, but a language to be learned. Because silence speaks. It speaks in the pauses between words, in the breath before the truth, in the space where endings meet beginnings. It tells us, you can live without filling every moment. You can love without holding. You can lose without breaking. And, perhaps most importantly, you can be whole, even when something is missing. That is the paradox, the sacred paradox of healing through absence. The silence you once resisted becomes the very thing that holds you. If you listen closely enough, you will notice that silence is never truly silent. There's a pulse beneath it, the soft hum of life continuing, the faint rhythm of your own breath. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there. Healing begins when we start to hear that music again. When everything collapses, a love, a friendship, a dream, the world seems to go mute. The colors fade, time distorts, the things that used to bring joy feel irrelevant, hollow. It's as if the orchestra of your life has stopped playing, and you're left standing alone on an empty stage, hearing only the echo of what was once vibrant. And yet, somewhere in that emptiness, a single note remains. Soft, persistent, waiting to be noticed, the sound of your own heart still beating. When we sit with absence, we begin to rediscover that rhythm. It doesn't rush to return. It unfolds slowly, as all truth does. You begin to notice small things, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the sound of rain against the window, the scent of your morning coffee. At first, they appear as interruptions to the silence. Then, over time, you realize they are the silence, its texture, its breath, its way of reminding you that life is still here, quietly inviting you back. That's the hidden generosity of absence. It strips away what is excessive, what is noisy, what is superficial, and leaves you with what is essential. In silence, you learn what matters. You learn to hear the inner music of your own being, the one that doesn't depend on applause, validation, or witness, the one that belongs only to you. We are so accustomed to defining ourselves through connection, and rightly so. Connection gives life its depth, its meaning. But when we rely entirely on others to feel alive, we lose touch with our own melody. Absence gives us back that melody. It teaches us to tune inwards, to find rhythm without an external conductor, to dance even when no one is watching, to trust that the music will return in a new form, a new movement, a new key. Sometimes healing is not the end of silence, but the discovery of harmony within it. When you begin to truly listen, you'll hear it everywhere. The silence of early morning holding the promise of a new day, the pause between heartbeats, the stillness that exists before a confession, a kiss, or a goodbye. There is a sacredness in that pause. The Japanese have a word, ma, that means the space between things, the pause that gives form to sound that makes music possible. Without silence, there is no song. Without absence, there is no presence. So perhaps the silence you are learning to sit with is not punishment, but preparation. It is making room for the next movement of your life. Because silence doesn't only represent what was lost, it also holds what has yet to come. Think of it like winter. The world seems barren, lifeless. Trees stand naked against gray skies. But beneath the frozen surface, something is happening. Roots are deepening. The earth is gathering strength. The quiet is gestating new life. Healing is winter work. It's the unseen labor of the soul. When we rush it, when we demand spring before its time, we uproot the very growth that is meant to sustain us. But when we trust the silence, when we let it do its slow, invisible work, we find that it was never emptiness at all. It was transformation in disguise. To heal, then, is to become intimate with waiting, to sit in that strange space where what was is gone and what will be has not yet arrived. It's a threshold, an in-between, and thresholds are sacred. They are places of crossing, where the old self meets the new, where endings and beginnings coexist. The silence of absence is the sound of that becoming. You may not hear it clearly at first, but it's there, in the beating of your heart, in the flicker of your breath, in the quiet courage it takes to keep showing up. Healing is not a return, it's a continuation. You are not going back to who you were. You are unfolding into who you are becoming. So listen to the silence, not as something empty, but as something speaking. Listen for the subtle rhythm of your own renewal. Listen for the spaces where grief softens into grace. And one day, without even realizing it, you will hear the music again. It will not be the same song, but it will be yours. There is a tender dialogue that happens between absence and presence. It's not spoken in words, but in feeling. To live fully, we must learn to hold both. Presence without awareness of absence becomes entitlement. We take what we have for granted, as if it were permanent. Absence without the memory of presence becomes despair. We forget that love ever existed, that connection is possible. Healing is the integration of the two, to remember presence in absence and to honor absence even in presence. When someone you love leaves, they don't disappear completely. They remain in gestures, in phrases, in the way you laugh, in the choices you make. They become part of your inner landscape. Every relationship leaves an imprint. Some are visible, others invisible, but all of them shape us, not by their duration, but by their depth. And when they are gone, their absence becomes a teacher. It asks us, how will you live now? What will you carry forward? What will you let go of? Healing begins not when you stop missing them, but when you start listening to what their absence is teaching you. Maybe it's teaching you patience. Maybe it's teaching you self-compassion. Maybe it's reminding you that love was never meant to be owned, only experienced. Presence and absence are not opposites. They are partners in the same dance. One gives meaning to the other. To sit with absence is to deepen your capacity for presence, because only when you've known emptiness do you truly savor fullness. Only when you've walked through silence do you truly hear music. In every loss, something remains. In every silence, something speaks. In every ending, something begins. And perhaps that is the essence of healing, not to silence the silence, but to hear its hidden song. There comes a moment in every healing journey when the silence no longer feels like an intruder. It sits beside you now, quietly, gently, like an old companion. The same silence that once filled the room with ache now fills it with breath, space, possibility. You no longer rush to cover it. You no longer fear its echo. Instead, you begin to recognize it as something sacred, the sound of your own becoming. Integration begins here. To integrate silence is to weave it into the rhythm of your life, not as an interruption, but as a form of wisdom. It becomes the pause between your words, the stillness before your choices, the calm beneath your storms. You start to understand that healing isn't about reaching some enlightened state where you feel nothing but peace. It's about building a larger capacity to hold joy and pain, love and loss, sound and silence, without being broken by either. We heal not by erasing the parts of us that hurt, but by learning to make space for them. When you can sit with absence without needing it to disappear, you are no longer defined by what you've lost. You are shaped by what you've learned. You begin to see that absence was never just a void. It was an invitation to meet yourself in your most unadorned form, to discover the person who exists when no one is watching, the one who breathes quietly in the stillness, who is enough simply because they are. This is not the self that performs or pleases or clings. It's the self that simply is. The self that remembers, even without, I am still with. Because presence doesn't always require two. Sometimes it's the presence you offer to yourself, the way you listen inwardly, the way you comfort your own trembling, the way you stay when everything in you wants to run. Healing asks of us an extraordinary tenderness. Not the grand gestures of forgiveness or letting go that we so often romanticize, but the daily gentleness of staying with what is, even when what is hurts. Integration is slow. It's subtle. It doesn't announce itself. It's in the way you wake up one morning and realize you no longer measure your day by what's missing. It's in the way you talk about the past without flinching. It's in the way you stop needing every silence to be filled with words. And slowly, quietly, the silence changes flavor. It's no longer bitter. It's bittersweet. It carries memory, yes, but also meaning. Because every silence you have endured has taught you something about love. Not the kind that stays, but the kind that remains. There is a love that exists even after the leaving. A love that doesn't ask for return, for confirmation, for form. A love that simply holds. That is the love that grows out of healing. It's not the love that binds, but the love that frees. The love that says, you were here, you mattered, and because of you, I became more alive. When we integrate the silence of absence, we become fluent. In this language, the language of invisible continuity, we realize that connection doesn't end where presence does. It shifts form. It becomes energy, memory, resonance. It becomes the way you listen differently now, the way you see others' pain and meet it without turning away, the way you speak more truthfully, live more fully, love more gently. Every silence you've sat through has deepened your capacity for empathy, for awe, for grace. And perhaps that is what healing truly means, to turn absence into compassion. Because once you have learned to sit with your own silence, you will never again be afraid of another's. You will recognize the quiet between words. You will sense what is unsaid. You will know how to hold space, not to fix, not to fill, but simply to witness. That is how the silence becomes a bridge, not a barrier. It connects rather than divides. It reminds us that even when we cannot speak, we are still in dialogue. Even when we cannot see each other, we are still connected by the shared human experience of longing, loss, and return. Integration means you no longer see silence as the absence of life, but as one of its essential expressions. The way music needs pauses to breathe. The way night nourishes the day. The way absence deepens love. When you reach this place, you begin to live differently. You no longer chase constant connection. You no longer fear being alone. You no longer confuse silence with emptiness. Instead, you honor it. You trust it. You move with it. Because you've learned that everything meaningful, love, art, intimacy, truth, is born from the same source. The courage to be with what is unseen, unspoken, unfinished. You've learned that the silence of absence is not a void to survive, but a space to inhabit. A space where the past rests, where the future gestates, and where the present breathes. In that space, you are not waiting for someone or something to complete you. You are already complete. You are the presence that fills your own silence. There's a moment, often imperceptible, when silence transforms from something you endure into something you cherish. You begin to realize that every absence has made room for a new presence, a deeper connection to yourself, to others, to life itself. You start to live with a quieter confidence. You don't need constant reassurance, constant noise, constant proof that you are loved or seen, because you've sat in the silence long enough to know that love does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it simply is. You've learned that the absence of someone doesn't erase the presence of love, that grief is not the opposite of love, but its continuation, that silence is not the end of a story, but the space where a new one begins. Healing has made you softer, but not fragile, open, but not exposed. You carry silence like a secret strength. When you walk into the world now, you move differently. You listen more than you speak. You notice more than you seek. You hold space for others because you have learned to hold it for yourself. You have discovered that silence, once feared as emptiness, is the birthplace of empathy, and that to heal is not to fill every silence, but to let it breathe. Because within that silence lives the truth of every human experience, that love and loss are not opposites, but twins, that every ending leaves behind a beginning, that every absence carries within it the seed of presence. So, when you sit with the silence now, you no longer ask, "When will this end?" You ask, "What is this teaching me?" And the silence answers, softly, everything you need to know about love. It teaches you that presence is precious, that connection is sacred, that nothing is guaranteed. It teaches you to savor, to pause, to listen. Because every silence, every absence, every stillness you have lived through has been preparing you for this, to be here, fully, to love, knowing it may end, to give without assurance of return, to be present, even when presence is fleeting. That is the true art of healing, not to erase the silence, but to make music with it, not to overcome absence, but to live beautifully alongside it. And so, in the end, you sit once more in the quiet. The world hums softly around you. You breathe, you remember, you smile. And in that simple act of being, you realize healing was never about escaping the silence. It was about learning to listen until it began to sing.